So my name is Phillip Lasser, and I'm a composer and a pianist. I'm a professor at the Juilliard School, where I've taught since 1994. I teach counterpoint, harmony, analysis, and composition. Um, and I am also the director of the European American Musical Alliance, EAMA Summer Music Institute in Paris, France. Music for me, from a very early age, was always an issue of counterpoint and how counterpoint blended in to harmony. And I feel that composers think of them as separate, counterpoint, harmony. And yeah, we study them. We tend to do that in school. We study counterpoint and harmony as classes. And yet, you can't have harmony without counterpoint. And in a sense, counterpoint is nothing more than the harmonious blending of lines. And so when I was a young boy, I was practicing the piano. I started when I was 5. And I remember I was playing my first prelude, and so on. And what I found fascinating was all the way at the end, Bach does. And he's all the way down here, and he should do that's what it should be. But of course, he brings up that last measure up an octave. And that poses a really interesting problem. First of all, why do that? And as a young boy, I was thinking, why? It should just be down here. It makes more sense. And then I started, this is took me a long time to come up with these ideas. But first of all, I figured, lines, as I talk about, contrapuntal voices, the ear is very, very clear about which line moves where. And lines move by step only. Obviously, there are certain more complicated issues, but in a simple way, it's true that lines move strictly by step. So if you leap from a pitch, even a third, an interval of a third, you are creating two contrapuntal voices. So again, before I finish my story with the Bach, this is one voice. And you can do chromatic, it doesn't matter. And you can see that rapidly that gets very boring. You couldn't write a piece with one voice, not possible. But as soon as you do a leap, even of a third, you're creating a hierarchy, and so on. So I started to realize, well, okay, so if notes really only move by step, you have notes that are consonant to the harmony, like the C major, Do major, and you have notes that are dissonant to the Do major. Well, let's look. Fa. Now that pitch, I always say two things. Number one, why didn't he just do it down here? And why didn't he do... So even up here, why not? Now those students who might know Heinrich Schenker theory of line, it's similar, but Schenker takes the Fa and brings it down an octave. He says it's here. And that one resolves, and I don't deny that, it does resolve. But then I would say, well, then why did Bach bring it up an octave to begin with? It doesn't make any sense. And then I started to come up with really the reason. The reason is, you know, we tend to look at music in a book like this. This is how it's printed. And so therefore the beginning is here on the left, top left of the first page, and the end is on the bottom of the right page. But music doesn't work physically. It works under what circumstance? Well, the answer is it works in time. Because if you don't believe that, here are all the notes of this piece, all at the same time. So why does it make sense? Well, because we live in time. So I'm hearing a constant present, and that present is becoming the past, and that past creates a set of expectations for the future. And now I'm going to go a little faster. We're always lower. We're staying down. The piano is much lower. It's nowhere near that pitch. And now comes the ultimate point. Why not put me? So first of all, Bach did not forget his high sol, that is in bar 7, which came from a high la in bar 5, and the rest of the music is below it, so that pitch hangs over the whole piece. And finally, in the second to last measure, he finally comes back to that register and brings the sol to a fa. And so I ask the enigma, why not me? We'd be so happy. We'd have heard, and the piece would be complete, except for one big thing. Time is cyclic, not linear. I don't need to prove that. I can only say when you see our Roman sundials, well, what does it do? It doesn't do this. It's a circle, and you see the shadow go in a circle. A year is a circle around the sun. A day is a circle around the earth itself turning. I think Bach understood that better than any other human at the time and said, how can I make time be the structure of music? And the answer is because whereas music is printed in a book form, actually what I did was I traveled from a beginning along a giant circle back to the memory of the beginning. And so I will show you. If you think about La, Sol, and then you wait for Fa, Mi, and it makes a perfect circle. And that principle started me thinking about so much about how, number one, counterpoint, because that's a counterpoint line, top line, how counterpoint creates structure. That he went up an octave in the second to last measure to remember a pitch that he had left hanging for many measures. And then the ultimate philosophical thing is not to put the E at the last measure, which would suggest a disconnection between the beginning and the end, but rather to have that F stay so that we have to, even when we hear that chord, which is what I call being human, because in fact we're human, we have to stop somewhere. But what he's suggesting is an infinite circle back to the beginning. And this process he does many, many, many times. I encourage students to take the well-tempered clavier and look at the end of a prelude or the end of a fugue and see the meaningful connection back to what I call the memory of the beginning. He does it many, many times. And it shows a deep philosophical understanding about structure in music, which links counterpoint through the idea of these linear scales and the fact that time is not linear, it's cyclic.